So it got a little heated last week after the Bank of Canada interest rate hike when we started talking about what does this mean, how will this affect you, whether it's first-time home buyers. Although the truth of the matter is when interest rates go up, it affects everybody and everything, right? Because credit cards go up, prices go up apparently with it, even though they introduce a rate hike to slow demand down because we're dealing now with inflation for the first time in a while. But then as we took calls on it, it got a little more interesting. I believe his name was Nick, and Nick called up to say, look, I work in the in construction, and I can tell you the price of lumber, which has gone on a crazy ride over the past, say, 2 years, the only reason it's going up is because we're being gouged. In essence, that's what he was saying. So whether it's retailers, suppliers, they've kind of all colluded in a sense. One passes on a higher price, which forces the next person to pass on a higher price. And the bottom line is consumers are the ones who get it in the backside because we ultimately end up paying more and more and more. Now, when he made that argument, I said, look, I think we have to take into account simply more than the fact that retailers are gouging us because they can. Where there have been supply chain issues, there have been weather issues. So I thought rather than me trying to speculate on all these things, let's get someone who can actually provide an answer. John Innes is former dean at the University of British Columbia's Faculty of Forestry. He's on the line right now. Mr. Innes, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Let's begin by asking that obvious question, which is simply, why has the cost of lumber, in your opinion, been so volatile?
Well, I think you used the words crazy ride earlier, and I would say that is certainly the case. If we go back to prior to COVID, prices were around about $300 to $400 dollars per thousand board feet. During the COVID crisis, they started rising, and by August 2020, they'd reached 800, which was pretty well an unheard of peak. They then dropped back again, and in the following year, so in the middle of 2021, they really hit the roof. They went up to 1,600, 1,700. And then they fell back again because people stopped buying because it was just so expensive. Since then, however, we've seen a rise occurring since about October 2021, and it peaked in January. It's dropped back a little bit, but currently the prices are about 900, which is well over double what it was prior to COVID. So what's going on here? There have been actually different things happening. So the first rise was caused by a lot of people being sent home, working from home, and then deciding they would do some renovations. That required lumber. At the same time, a lot of the companies had actually stopped producing because they were expecting a major slump. So there was a shortage of lumber, prices went up. When people realized what was going on, the lumber mills really started producing a lot of timber, and the prices came down again. Then last year, what happened, we saw this huge rise. It then dropped back again in July to October when people were basically beginning to go back to work, no longer doing their home renovations. But at the same time, what we saw were a lot of fires occurring in British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, which resulted in many mills having to close down. And then we had flooding, and the flooding in British Columbia in particular, which took out the railways, took out the road networks, and so there was a shortage of wood, and prices started rising. What people then did, particularly the lumber buyers, who are thinking about what's the price going to be 3 months out, they started putting in orders because they didn't want to see a repeat of what happened in May 2021. And that's currently why the prices are as high as they are. So people are anticipating the shortage. There is actually a shortage. We've got a variety of other things going on at the moment. We've got the tariffs on the lumber. We've got the housing starts in the U.S. that are beginning to look like they are on an upward trend again after a major hiccup during COVID. And so the demand is going up. You'd have thought then the mills might fill that in. They're not, because the mills can't get the wood off their sawmills. They're sitting on huge amounts of inventory because there's a shortage of truck drivers, there's a shortage of rail cars. They can't get the wood to market. And so that's what's driving those prices. said it's complicated.
Wow, is it ever? Describing all the various components, if you will, that will eventually, or that did eventually send up the price. The question then becomes, okay, if we take all that into consideration, COVID is still a thing, although it's not obviously what it was when we had to shut down businesses and go into lockdowns. When do you foresee that the price will begin to stabilize?
Well, a lot of people are believing that prices may actually rise again. When you look at the analyst reports, what they are now looking at is the rise in house starts in the U.S. And currently it's higher than it has been for a long time, even with the mortgage rates and interest rates rising. It's about 1.7 million at the moment. It has been as low as 400,000 at one point. But that's one of the primary drivers of the demand for wood, and that's going to push prices to a certain level. On top of that, there's the tariffs that were increased, so it's 18%. For many companies in the East, Resolute, I believe, is actually on 30%. So that's adding a further $100 to $150 to the price at the current prices. So many people are reckoning that we'll see a stabilization somewhere between $700 and maybe $1,100 per thousand board feet. Right now we're at $900, so right in the middle of that range. Mm-hmm. So the forecast is for prices to be roughly at this level for some considerable time.
So when I prefaced our interview by saying that we've had callers who are convinced that they're being gouged now because in other words, the reason prices are going up is because the people supplying it can actually ask for more and get it. It's not that simple as you just described. But is some of that involved?
Sorry, I missed that.
Is some of that involved, though, them just deciding, look, we went through a tough time, we had to shut down, we're going to get our money back now. The way to do it is by charging more.
Well, I'm not the best person to ask that. I don't actually understand the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day costs. I don't think it's a major factor, but it could certainly be involved.
Which begs the question then for people listening to this, thinking as you describe it, and we're kind of in the middle, if you will, of that 700 to 1,100. What would it take for the price to go back to where it was 3 years ago, or is that never going to happen again in your estimation?
Well, if interest rates keep rising and mortgage rates keep rising, and they get up to the sort of level that they were back in the 20 to 30 years ago, then that would put a real damper on the housing starts. And if that happened, then the price of lumber would come down. But at the moment, the mortgage rate right now, I believe, is the 30-year mortgage is about 5%, just over 5%. It's the highest it has been in 11 years, but we haven't seen any impact on housing starts yet. If it goes up much more, then I would expect the housing starts to start slowing down again.
Which is interesting because as you're describing this, I think to myself, you're kind of, between a rock and a hard place if you're the government. The government introduces, or the Bank of Canada introduces higher interest rates, but the government wants to have more houses built because we know there's a shortage in the country. They seem to be mutually opposed.
They are, but there are ways that you can deal with it. In some countries, there are a number of ways that mortgages are offset against tax, or at least some of the cost of a mortgage, to encourage homeowners to invest in mortgages. So there are ways that this can be handled by the government if it chooses to do so.
Have you ever seen a boom and bust cycle like this in lumber before?
Lumber's always going up and down. It's been very cyclic for the last 30, 40 years. What we haven't seen is the wild fluctuations that we've seen in the last 2 years. And the price has gone from 300 or 400 to 4 times that in the space of a couple of years.
Well, I guess, as you said, we're going to have to wait a while. This is not going to change inside of the next 6 months, that's for sure, right?
No, I don't think so.
Mr. Innes, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
John Innes, former dean at the University of British Columbia and their Faculty of Forestry.